So this build is very important to me, to the extent that I've already kind of wound myself up by having a conversation with an invisible person before I even started this commentary. I'm going to be building an autism support center, and I've thought about doing something like this before. I've never said before, but I was diagnosed with autism 3 years ago, and since then it's been a period of learning and turmoil. This was spurred on by a recent proposed change in British Parliament that we will go into. But before that, we're going to start. And we're going to start here with my trusty mannequin, who we put down here for scale. So for the shell, I'll just go over what I'm going to do for the shell. I'm going to make it a round. I'm going to split it into 4 different sections that we're going to go over in a bit. There's different reasons for these sections. I'm going to do it in sort of like wood, sort of white, green. I'm going to make it look quite earthy, natural, because being in nature and nature sort of colors and things really helps me to feel more relaxed in an environment. And obviously we're trying to make this trying to reduce the amount of overwhelmed that people might feel if they're coming to this center. And I'm also going to make the roof have like foliage on it as well, because I'm always trying to get a bit of nature into my builds. I feel like we need to increase the greenery and not decrease it. So any surface where I can manage to shove some greenery on it, I will do that. And I'm going to show you that in a little time lapse. But that's basically what I'm going to do for the exterior, and most of this commentary is probably going to be me talking more about autism and trying to stay on track rather than going off in a complete rant. So we'll see how that goes. I have a lot to say, but first we need to address what is this proposed change in Parliament that has spurred me on to making this build. So last week in Parliament, I had this it's been quite a controversial topic, but they're trying to make it harder for people with mental health conditions and autism to get financial support. And I thought, rather than being kind of angry about this, I would use this as an opportunity to sort of continue my theme of building a better world that I do sometimes on this channel, and I would turn this into something that was a bit more positive rather than just being angry about it. But the proposed change is basically that they're just trying to make it more difficult if you have autism or other mental health conditions, or they've said disabilities in general, but it's quite obvious that they're specifically targeting mental health with this, and they're going to make it a lot more difficult. They're going to increase all of the criteria for you to get personal independence payments. They're going to completely change the system. And the idea here is, well, what they're hoping, which I think is quite stupid, but they're thinking that if they remove the payments, then it will just suddenly, people with autism will acquire a skill to suddenly be able to get a job that they didn't have, as if everyone's really lazy and that's why they need personal independence payments. It's very insulting. It's quite insulting. But the thing that really got to me about this is, it's all well and good, and it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if people with autism were able to get jobs more easily, but it's just not the case. And if you're going to remove the funding for it, you then need to implement it with something that is actually going to support people in getting jobs, and I've heard nothing about any kind of plan for anything they're going to do regarding that. So this is my version, this is my idealistic vision, set in a society where they've sort of realized that they need to do that, and that's what I'm building today in a hopeful way. The business and hobbies pack has really made this easier for me to do, because we obviously can put in activities and things. So we're going to be making this a small business, and we're going to be adding the activities that we're going to implement into this support center, and we're going to be putting them in the activities menu for the small business. And yeah, we're doing some of that whole make-believe, just pretend it's a support center based on the activities. We can pretend, but this is sort of slightly functional, I guess, is what it's meant to be, even though there's not autism in The Sims. There's not actually any kind of disabilities in The Sims. We're going to include a accessible toilet. I'm going to include ramps for wheelchairs and things like that. I was really trying to make this a very accessible build, but I really wanted to get this just shell opening bit as me sort of setting the scene for what's going on here, and so also try and get all of these thoughts out of my head that are going to stay in my head if I don't bring them out at the start of this build. So there's a few issues with this proposed change, in my opinion. And number one is it's already hard. It's very hard to get support because many people with autism are very good at masking that they have autism. And the condition is judged to get this support it's judged on a very external basis. So they might ask you questions like, can you get the bus? And being autistic, you sort of answer that. People tend to generally answer that quite technically, so they will reply yes. because if they have no other option but to get the bus, they can get the bus. And so that will get ticked off as like, yes, can get public transport. Whereas if they reworded the question, for example, and said, tell me what the mental process is that you go through when you have to get the bus, they would get a very different answer, because they might get someone who says, like, well, I have to psych myself up for 2 hours. I get very overwhelmed on the journey. I sit on the bus and I'm very anxious and I'm having to constantly like try and regulate how I'm feeling. When I get off the bus, I'm exhausted mentally from doing this. And then all of a sudden the story changes and it's like, yes, they can physically get the bus, but it's at a great mental tax in order to do so. And there's a problem in that we don't address autism this way when we're trying to see if people need more support. We're just asking them very basic questions. And because of that, a lot of people actually miss out on getting support. So the system is already flawed. And the second issue is nothing has been proposed at all that goes alongside this cut that they're trying to make that actually buffers support, that is non-existent, by the way, for autistic people in other ways to make up for that. And I'm talking specifically about support to help autistic people sort of integrate with society, because for me, that is the biggest issue. And I could talk about many, many things in this video. I could talk about how I personally feel that combining what was classic autism and Asperger's into one diagnosis has only muddied the waters and completely just made everything very complicated. I could talk about how I think it's quite dangerous at the moment, a very dangerous climate of clickbait information videos, mostly produced by like young people who are just self-diagnosed. I could talk about all of these things, but I'm going to try and keep this concise and stick to this one topic. So that's that this build is going to focus on that one issue, which is currently the most important one for me. And that is helping people with autism to integrate into society, because many of its systems work in very counterproductive ways to the autistic mind, and it just takes a lot of mental power in order to try and like navigate life in society if you have autism. And it's really just because society has been built for people whose brains work in a specific way. I think that just a lot of people, the kind of person who is like a go-getter, who is career driven, who wants to be a leader, who wants to be on the top, they rise to a position where they're like making the rules and regulations. And I think as human beings, we're often quite short-sighted, and we expect that everyone sort of functions in the same way that we do. And so over a long period of time, society has molded to sort of work best for these people who get into the position of being able to make the rules and regulations. The world has got so much bigger and so much complicated, and you're expected to do so much more. And so more and more people who aren't of this same like mental type are struggling with it. And then of course, because it's society and we judge everything based on how well you can work in society, we then just start labeling all of these things as disorders, when in my personal opinion, I think a lot of them are actually quite beneficial traits to have if we were to just remove society and exist in nature. For example, me being extremely conscious of every single sensory thing that's going on around me would probably be quite beneficial in my survival in a sort of wild environment, but in society it's considered a nuisance because it screws up my concentration and takes up a lot of brain power, and I get easily overwhelmed by all of the sensory things that we've put in society to try and like keep these people at the top in this state of constant engagement that they want to be in. So this build is essentially an idealistic vision of if society was in a place, which hopefully it will be soon, where it has recognized this flaw in how we've made all of these systems and realized that there needs to be things that are added to it in order to support the people who don't sort of excel in this wild, fast-paced, hard pressure environment. So I'll talk a little bit about the build now after all of that rambling. I'm trying to get lots of natural light in here because that helps me when I'm in environments to be able to like, number one, see outside and see that I'm sort of, there is nature there. We're not completely detached in this concrete society. So I try to make this sort of daylighty but also not too garish. It's a very fine balance. It's really hard for me to explain. This waiting room, I wanted it to be both open so you don't feel trapped in there, but also not exposed. And I've done this using these divider items that came with Business and Hobbies, and they're actually, I think, one of my favorite items in the game now. They're really nice, and I scale them up and down to different levels and things, but I think what I like about them is that they're slats, so they divide, but they also don't completely block. So they're really good at creating this sort of very comfortable feeling of the room isn't too open, but you're also not completely trapped. And I don't know what it is about this specific balance of things being open but also concealed that is very comfortable for me and really helps with feeling overwhelmed. I don't know whether it's almost like being in a woods where there's like trees and you can see through the trees, but the trees also to an extent make a kind of broken barrier. Maybe it's that, maybe that's how the brain works, who knows. But that's what I've tried to do here in this waiting room, and also made it so that there's like a self-serving checkout or check-in or whatever you want to call it, which is obviously just the ticket machine, but we're gonna pretend it's just like a self-check-in. I really do feel sometimes like having an autistic brain is just that you really have a brain that's just it's designed to be in nature rather than this artificial societal environment that we've made. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether that's like sometimes it's a hindrance but sometimes it's a benefit. It's one of those it's like very mixed. I haven't quite figured out what I think about that yet. But the thing I really wanted to do in this build that I've not done in a build before is make, I don't know what's the politically correct way of naming this toilet now. Is it a disabled toilet? Is it an accessible toilet? But that's what I'm making. And I was using these, I've had to use CC pieces. One thing I would really love in the game is if people had like crutches and wheelchairs and things. But I guess that they just, the Sims will only be inclusive if they can add that inclusivity as a simple texture rather than a gameplay element. And I know that's shade and I'm just dragging them to filth, but that's the truth. And you know what I'm talking about. But I use these CC items to try and make these like assistance bars that you find in these toilets. And I looked online. I really wanted to do a good job of this. So I looked online at reference images of different like accessible toilets and where they have the bars and really what the bars are there for, imagining someone like in a wheelchair reaching for them, trying to make sure that they could reach these if they needed them for assistance. I couldn't find a pull cord, which I know are in many of these toilets, but I do end up adding an assistance button, which I will add in a bit. There it is, there's the red assistance button, and I had a couple of them in there because I was like, but what if they need it somewhere else as well? So I added an extra one. But as I was going through this, I was quite sad a little bit, to be honest, that number one, I'd had to use entirely CC of like curtain rails and drain pipes in order to try and make these, but also that I just felt it didn't really look that great at the end of it, and I felt a bit sad, like I'd really not done it justice. As I went through making this one, there's some like towel rails and hand dryers and soap and things, and I really did try my best to try and make this look like an accessible toilet, and it had everything in it that someone might need in this bathroom. But yeah, it's just drain pipes on a wall, and it was just upsetting me that I hadn't been able to find something to make this look more authentic. So I cared so much about that I ended up downloading a CC set that actually is a CC set of like assistance bars for these toilets. And I will link that in the description. But these, I really wish this was in the game. I really want to be able to just make these and not have to look for CC and all of these things to pretend that this is a gameplay element, especially when there's just such other things. Like, I'll be honest, there's things in these games that are just, they're really such like easy virtue signaling nonsense from The Sims. And I really don't think they actually care very much about inclusivity, because it's just, they'll only do it if it's a texture. And that's like, maybe that's harsh, but that is how I feel about it. I'm sorry, I'm not sorry, that is how I feel about it. But after I'd made these toilets, I realized, well, it's all great having these accessible toilets, but you've put stairs everywhere, Tom. You can only get up on these steps, so you should probably add some like ramps for people to, so that's what I'm trying to do here. And again, I'm using this CC piece, which I end up changing to use these slats again, which is that these slats are just the most versatile item, and I'm using the tool mod. I've rotated them and I'm going to sink them down a bit with the tool mod. It worked nicer than I thought, and I know there's some like slight gaps in there, but we're just going to say that like those gaps are far smaller than the width of a wheel, so it wouldn't be a problem. And there's a slight ledge at the top as well, but I did my best in trying to make something in the game where if you can't walk, tough shit, because they don't care about you. So oh dear. But we're now going to move inside to these different sections. So I'm going to explain to you what these sections are going to be. So this first one that I'm working on here, this is the room where this is going to be like a lecture room. I'm going to try and utilize this new lecture system even though the person that I got to own this business doesn't have any skills and can't actually lecture anything. Again, we will pretend. And I'm just building this room up to be a sort of presentation room. And this room is the only room here that isn't actually aimed at people who have autism. This is aimed at educating specifically employers, because we're going to start addressing this problem that I said now, is that people don't make it very easy for people with autism to integrate into society. And a huge culprit of that are businesses, because they have this misconception that people who have something that is classed as a disability, again, it's another topic, whether or not disabilities are actual disabilities or whether they're just societal interpretations of people who work differently. I mean, some are quite obviously, like a physical disability is obviously a lot more of it. Quite obviously, you need different accessibility options, but for mental health, it's I feel like it's a little bit down to interpretation a lot of the time, and is more a reflection of society being disabling rather than someone having a disability. But that's another topic. I won't rant about that for too long. But these are going to be lectures really just explaining to people the benefits of having people whose brains work differently in their company, what they can offer, and also how when you hire these people, you can support them by making maybe slightly different environments. You can, and it's not just about having those for autistic people too. I'm talking environments that are like, maybe you offer a little bit more, some dividers like I've put in this build, just to make people feel a little bit more comfortable and less like they're sort of in the open and being overwhelmed by everything going on around them. And who knows, maybe other people would prefer that as well. And then, that's a win-win for more than just autistic people. Oh, I also added a megaphone in case people needed shouting at for being, stupid. But we're going to move on to the next room now. This is going to have a few different uses. And the first one is, so number one, I thought maybe this would have, I don't know if you would call them support workers or life coaches or something like that. But I think there would be people who work here, and you would maybe meet up with them. They would maybe check in with you every once in a while to see how like your careers are going. I feel like they would have a list of careers that are like autism friendly maybe, and they can help you in trying to get a job. Maybe the government should look at helping people with autism get jobs instead of just taking their funds off them. Maybe they should do that. So that's what we're going to do here. That's what we're going to do in this build, in this room. And it will also be some like career workshops, as I said, suggesting careers that people with autism might want to try. Maybe ones that allow you to work at home a bit more. Maybe we should normalize that a bit more, and that would be helpful. And also like some work skills. There's PCs in here. You could learn, maybe teach people how to use, like Microsoft Word and Excel, things like that. Just help develop work skills. But really, this is just a combination room for the people who have autism who would be able to work with a bit more support, because many people with autism want to work. This is the thing that the government don't understand. We want to work, but it's just very mentally taxing. We get burned out, people get overwhelmed. Often people who are autistic have a pattern of getting into work and then eventually they'll be out of that job because they need some time to recover, and then they get another one. It's a pattern of having lots of different jobs, which again, they think, there's this conception that looks really, really bad on a record and things like that. It's just like, there's really no assistance, and I think businesses' viewpoints on what work looks like is quite toxic, really, to be honest. And that's what we need to change. And that's what this room's for. There's going to be different rooms, because this room, I need to make this clear. I'm not trying to say like, if you're autistic, you should get a job. This room is specifically for the people who are autistic, who want to work, who are able to work, but the support is very much lacking in the work environment. And this is to fill that gap in society where we've really not recognized that. Yeah, and that there is a gap there that needs filling. And maybe if this works well, again, I think elevating autistic people could help everyone, because I'm sure there are lots of people who aren't autistic who would also quite like these sort of different options of environment, different options of ways of working, rather than this very rigid way of like a 9 to 5 days a week that's just expected of everyone, when we all live very different lives. And I think this could be very beneficial to everyone. So I've done a little trick here. I place these sort of table things and line them up, obviously to make this curve, but they have that texture fighting, so I fixed that by using the tool mod to just nudge every other one of them up by like 0.001 pixel or something. And if you do that, it still looks like it's all in line, but it fixes that slight sort of texture fighting, so that's a little tip. And we're going to finish off this by adding a few more dividers and things. I've added a lot of art in this, and the art throughout I've chosen very specifically to be quite engaging, because I know that if I'm here, my brain at some point is gonna want to like look away and sort of regulate itself by looking at something that's quite textured. I'm really into texture, and sort of sensory stuff is very engaging to people with autism. Being able to sort of control your sensory experience is something that really helps you stop feeling overwhelmed. And we're really gonna go into that a bit more by when we're going into this third room. And this third room is very much the room that I would say this room is more like aimed at classic autism. Often people who are like non-verbal, who require more sort of sensory regulation, who often struggle a lot more to convey and describe feelings that they're going through and things. And this room is meant to try and sort of assist them. And this might be more of a sort of check-in room for people with autism, to just like try and ensure that they're getting checked on, making sure that they're living a life that is fulfilling to them to the best that they can. And so we've got a little sensory nook area where there's some, little sensory, there's lights and things if you want to go in there and just sort of regulate your sensory environment for a bit. And we're gonna have these are Harry chairs, Harry spoons chairs, the sort of modular ones that I'm going to place here, and they're looking out the window, so you have a nice view of the outside. Again, having this sort of, you're inside but you're not enclosed, and it's also not too open. I'm really trying to get that balance here to make things more comfortable, and I think we should do this a lot more in just all architecture. Again, I keep saying it, but I feel like adding these other options and thinking about things in a way that helps people with autism really helps everyone, because I truly believe many people, not just people with autism, are sort of struggling in how wild we've made society now, and how fast paced and how much you're expected to do, how much you're meant to just like go to places you've never been, meet new people all the time, respond to people immediately in emails and things like that. There's no stop to it. And I really feel like this is becoming relevant because people with autism, what was traditionally Asperger's, are the first group of people who have really got to the point where they can no longer sort of function in this environment. And it's going to get worse, and then more and more people, and maybe society will just do what they've done already, and they'll just extend the definition of autism to include all of these other people who are struggling, rather than actually address the problems of society itself. But we can always hope that they won't do that. But we're going to move on to the fourth and final room, and this is a sort of skills activities room. It's a lot more of a hands-on, crafty kind of room, and my thought process with this one is this room can be used as sort of like creative therapies, because therapy is quite a difficult thing. They've still not really figured out how to provide therapy for people who have autism, because therapy is basically been created with the assumption that everyone's brain sort of works the same, and that if you have anxiety and depression, you basically have it in the same way as anyone else who has anxiety and depression. Or if you feel emotions, you feel them in the exact same way as anyone else who feels emotions. And in autism, that's really not the case. Our brains work completely differently. And they're finding out now that a lot more different kinds of creative therapies are actually a lot more helpful for people with autism. If you can talk and also focus on doing something sort of crafty, that can be really helpful. But I also thought this room could be used for maybe helping people who perhaps aren't at the level where they want to have a full-time job in a business, in a career or whatever, but they do want to work, and they want to do it in a way that is more like creating things to sell, creating crafts to sell, maybe helping people set up like an online Etsy shop or something like that. Perhaps doing something like I'm doing right now, like having a YouTube channel or something that they're a lot more in control of. And that your life coach would help you with this. It would help you. Maybe they would have websites and things that support people who do this, who have autism, to try and help them sell what they're doing or whatever. And so that's what this room is really. And then the last thing we're going to do is going to move into the exterior. And I just wanted a little exterior because I thought, maybe you just want to go out and have a chat with your life coach or whatever we're calling them on a swing, because I would like that too. And I've added swings, and you'll notice too, in some rooms I've added rocking chairs rather than stationary chairs. And there's a reason for this as well. It's because doing a motion, people will call it stimming, where people with autism will like repeat a motion over and over again. And sometimes it's quite a clear motion, sometimes it's a hell of a lot more concealed, like playing with your hair or something that's a lot less noticeable. But we do these motions to try and like regulate our senses and create a stable environment that makes us feel more comfortable. And rocking on a rocking chair I thought could be a very soothing thing, or like swinging on a set of swings while you're having a discussion. It's just a way to help us like regulate how we're feeling a bit more. And so you could do this and you come outside. And I also thought, as a last little activity, which The Sims won't do, because I don't know why, maybe I didn't buy seeds or something, I'm not really sure, but it's to have some planters, and you can have like, you could teach people how to like grow their own food or things like that. Just very productive activities that make people feel good when they do them, and don't give us this feeling of, because when you're autistic, you often feel like you're just not good enough and you can't look after yourself, because these are things that we're just told constantly, even if often they're like not true, and we are very productive and look after ourselves in completely different ways, because we don't do them in the ways that are like what are considered the normal, in quotation mark, ways. We're made to feel like we're not good enough, and we're not good at looking after ourselves, and we're not good at like functioning on a normal human level. And off a lot of these activities, especially, I feel like when I do them, I feel like very accomplished as a human being. Like I can survive and do things. And so we're going to really like try and help people in performing these activities that are quite physical and simple, and really help you to feel good about yourself, and also sort of regulate how you're feeling by having quite a simple thing to just focus on, and something that is, you know, sort of performed in a similar way that is quite predictable in how it's going to turn out. And I'm also going to put some benches out here too. So now after all of that rambling, I decided Bonkers Betty would own this business, because she clearly has a plant obsession, as you can see in the background here, and a sore back apparently. And first thing she does immediately is go and have a nap in one of our sensory nooks. So I think she approves, and that she is absolutely the correct person to own this business. So I've created the business activities here, and we've got attend classes and lectures, write, cross stitch, do pottery, knitting, paint, play Don't Wake the Llama, whatever the hell that is, and tend and harvest the garden. And of course, none of these things are like, I'm not saying that any of these things are what people with autism should be doing. I've literally just picked these to make this look like the build's got something going on, and we're going to pretend that there are other things, and there's like life coaching and therapy and education going on around these things, and that it's not just people going for a nice little crafting day out. And I've also set the entrance fees to disabled, which, I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about that wording, but there's no entrance fee. And the first thing that happened here is that a ghost possessed a computer, so I don't know why that happened. I don't know why she's arrived, but everyone's welcome, I suppose. So as you can see here, here's the finished build. We've got, so I was restricted in these cinematics because items kept disappearing at certain camera angles, so we're going to go over it from this like bizarre top-down view. I hope that's fine. And you can see we've got the 4 rooms that you can see in lots of light coming through, lots of daylight. You're inside, but you're also outside. This very fine balance of protected but not concealed. I don't know, is that the wording? I don't know. I'm at the point now where I'm going to have to cut so much audio out of this. I've just rambled the whole time. I tried not to, but I did. I rambled the whole time. And we have this crafty room, as you can see, and then the more like sensory room. And I'll just take you through them one by one. I've added a few things to each of them, a few more bits of clutter, but I've tried to keep them quite simple, really, because this was more of a build this was the intention behind the build, rather than making it one of my usual overly cluttered. Every wall has an individual like design sort of thing. And then we have this staff car park here. And if you're wondering why there's like not much room in the car park, well, that's just British parking for you, so that's very normal. I don't know how you're going to get your car through there, but good luck. So here we are in the waiting room. And I really made this build. I wanted to feel like I would feel quite comfortable in this build. And I do. I feel like I would feel really sort of energized in this build. And I can't really explain why. And here's what the toilet turned out like in the end. I'm really happy, and I will link the packs. Here's the little sort of like computer room. I forgot what I said that was for. for life coaching and job skills and employment, just like encouraging. It's just a very encouraging room, very helpful. It's trying to make work less overwhelming for people who feel like they can work but are stuck out of it because of how society currently looks. There's one of the rocking chairs I spoke about. Little crafting corners. This guy's making a painting that he might sell on Etsy or something. You could do knitting and crochet, or no, it's called cross stitching, isn't it? There's some Amano shrimp tanks here, which you can click on and it says buy fish, not shrimp, which is a fish enthusiast who had a biologically self-sustaining aquarium at one point. That does mildly offend me. And here's the little sensory room, these sensory nooks. You have these like things on the wall that you can flip. I'm not really sure what they are. And we're playing, are we doing a puzzle or what are we doing? We're doing a puzzle. See, yeah, puzzles again, amazing thing to just like regulate your focus and how you're feeling. And it's really about teaching you can do more than what you think you can. And then we have this lecture room, and like I said, she's got no, Bonkers Betty has no skills, so she can't do a lecture, but just pretend that there's a lecture going on here, and they're like, guys, stop being prejudiced, you can hire people who are different, it's not the end of the world, take off your stupid black suits. Anyway, and we're just going to finish off here with a little puzzle. Thank you so much for watching this build. I don't know what commentary is going to turn out like, because I just rambled the whole build. But I needed to get this out in the universe. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.